Today we'll talk about right to freedom. Right to freedom is there in the Constitution from Article 19 to Article 22. Now, if we talk about personal liberty, then it is the most important of all fundamental rights. Article 19 to 2020, Article 19 to 2022 deal with different aspects of this basic right, and if we take these four together, then it's form a chapter on personal liberties, which provides the backbone to this chapter of fundamental right. Now, if we talk about the important aspect of liberty, then Article 19 is a very important, and under this article, there are six freedom that are guaranteed to the citizens. Under 19, six freedoms are guaranteed to the citizens that provides the backbone that citizen by Article 19 of the Constitution. If we have to talk about these six freedom, then they are, first of all, freedom of speech and expression. Separately, we'll discuss all these. Then, freedom of assembly. Other one is freedom of, freedom to form association or unions or cooperative societies. Next one is freedom of movement. Freedom of freedom to reside and to settle in any part of India. There was this app, freedom of property, freedom to have property. It was omitted by 44th Constitutional Amendment Act that came in 1978. And the last one is freedom of profession, occupation, trade, or business. These are the six freedom that have been guaranteed by the Article 19. But one thing I want to remind you, that these six freedom are not absolute. Again, I'll say that these freedoms are not absolute. What does this mean? It means they have certain limitations. Absolute, now I'll tell you the reason that why these freedoms are not absolute, or why these freedoms are having limitation. The simple point is that absolute individual rights cannot be guaranteed by any modern state. An organized society is the precondition of civil liberties. There cannot be any right which is injurious to the to the community as a whole. If people were given complete and absolute liberty without any social control, the result would be ruined. Liberty has got to be limited in order to be effectively possessed. So remember this thing, that these are the some reasons to keep this article limited or keep these freedom limited. For example, one for his own liberty must not offend the liberty of others. So say for example, if you have a liberty or you want to do something or you wish to desire something, and at the same time whatever you want to do, whatever you want to say, it can curtail the liberty of some other person. This is not allowed in the constitution. The restriction, so there are certain restrictions on these freedoms. You can ask me the question that where are these restrictions? The restriction, the restriction provided in article 19.2, from article 19.2 to article 19 clause 6, 19.2 to 19 clause 6, these are the restrictions. One important thing you need to understand, that the restriction that may be imposed under any of the clause, under any of these clause, must be reasonable restriction. So obviously the government, the restriction can be imposed, but they should be reasonable. If they are not reasonable, then they'll be declared void. If a restriction has to be constitutionally valid, then it must satisfy two tests. What are these two tests? First one is, the restriction must for the purpose mentioned in clause 2 to 6 of article 19. This is the first condition. The second condition, the restriction must be reasonable. So these are the two tests that will be applied if a restriction has to be constitutionally valid. Now, what is the test for reasonable restriction? Supreme Court has come up with certain guidelines, and I'm going to discuss those things. I can discuss directly article with you also, but the simple thing is that this is the very important concept that you need to understand, and mains questions are based on this thing. And if anything is coming in the examination, then you can mention all these things. So you first of all you need to understand what are the reasonable restriction, what is the test of reasonable restriction, Supreme Court guidelines and all, and then we can move ahead and discuss further things. The important thing is that restriction on the rights under Article 19 can only be imposed by the law. This is the most important thing, and not executive or departmental instruction. So it's not like that the government can give instruction to impose the restriction. If the restriction has to be there, then there should be a law. The law will authorize the restriction. This is the one important thing. And the phrase reasonable restriction in Article 19(6), I'm talking particularly in the context of 19(6). So there is this phrase that is a reasonable restriction. It means that the restriction imposed on a person in the enjoyment of his right should not be arbitrary. So, first condition is that reasonable restriction can be imposed, but one thing, they should not be arbitrary. Second thing, they should not be excessive. They should not be of an excessive nature beyond what is required in the interest of the public. A law which arbitrarily or excessively invades the right of a person cannot be said to contain the quality of reasonableness. And if the restriction is not reasonable, it is void. Alright, now I'll tell you the guidelines of Supreme Court. Anyone, if you have any doubts so far, you can ask me. Any doubt? Okay. What are these guidelines? Okay, I'm going to discuss with you. First thing is, it is the court, not the legislature, which has to judge finally whether a restriction is reasonable or not. So court will decide. Court will judge whether a restriction is reasonable or not. Second thing, the term reasonable restriction that is there in the Article 19 clause 6, it connotes that limitation imposed on a person in the enjoyment of his right should not be arbitrary or of an excessive nature beyond what is actually required in the interest of public. This we have already discussed. What is the meaning of this word reasonable? The meaning of this word reasonable implies intelligent care and deliberation. Intelligent care and deliberation. That is the choice. Therefore, the restriction must have a reasonable relation with the object which the legislation seek to achieve and never exceeded it. So, say for example, if there is any act, let's say that Parliament passes an act and it says that if any person shout in public place, he will be fined. Fined. Shout in public place without any valid reason, he will be fined. Now, what is the, let's say this is the act. What is the objective of this act? Kunal, क्या गवर्नमेंट क्या अचीव करना चाह रही है यहाँ से? सम्राट, यू टेल मी.
So harmony amongst people in the society.
Yes, harmony. Apart from that, I'm saying that uh, I'll tell you one thing, and then you have to try to connect this example with the thing that I'm telling you. So I'm saying that the restriction must have a reasonable relation with the object which the legislation seeks to achieve and must never exceed it. Now, how can you connect this example with the line I have just told you? Government has come up with a law, and the law simply says that if any person shout in public place without any valid reason, he will be fined. So, what is the objective of this law? What is the object, and what is the relation of this restriction with the objective of this legislation? Let's simply say that quite often we go into the public places and lot many people are shouting, screaming, and it kind of disturbs the environment. It kind of disturbs the that peace of that particular place. Everywhere you will find the chaos. So what, and somehow it's not good for the mental health also. So let's say that the government wants to achieve the objective that the people, one person should not cause any harm to other person mental health, okay, by screaming or by any other way. So if you, someone is constantly shouting and all, obviously anyone can lose the cool, which is not good for the mental health. So main, so the restriction is being put to maintain that peace in the society, that peace in that public place, right? So can you see the relationship between the objective, that what is the restriction? Restriction is that you will not shout in the public place. What is the objective? Objective is to achieve that to maintain the peace, or maintain that silence would be much better word, to maintain the silence on that particular place, right? So now, can, are you able to connect that these things are interconnected, or do you think that this is excessive? What do you think, Samrat? Do you
Yes, sir.
think?
Like as you said, peace or in that case, public order
No, I'm
also
just
might
saying
be
basically silence would be a
just.
proper appropriate word. So the
But sir, is this law in its sense curtailing the freedom
no,
to an excess?
no, you can speak, but you cannot shout. That's the important thing. And it also said without any valid reason. So if you have a valid reason, then you can then you can shout, okay. But if you don't have any valid reason and for nothing you are shouting and screaming, then obviously it will disturb that this silence which has to be observed at that this particular public place. Let's say a temple, let's say a place of worship, right? Are you trying to get my point, what I'm trying to say? So the objective is to maintain that silence in that particular public place. But if anyone wants to disturb this silence, then the person should have a valid reason, or the person will be fined. So the restriction is that you cannot shout in this particular public place. And if you do so, then either you should have a valid reason or you will have to pay the fine. So ultimate objective is to maintain that silence. Are you getting my point? Or Samrat, you have any counter question for this?
Also got it.
I just give you an example to make you understand that there should be a nexus, there should be a relation, and the relation should not be like this that nobody is able to understand what kind of this relation. The relationship should also be a reasonable, that okay, this legislation wants to achieve this particular object, and that is the reason the restriction is there. Now I'll tell you one more example. Let's say there is a legislation and it says no one shall come to within the 100 meters of international boundary if anyone do so then may be detained. Now what is the objective of this, what is the objective of this law? Samrat?
So, mm, so within the boundary, it
Within,
might lead to crossing of the boundary as well. So it gives the person freedom to. They might do extra terrestrial, like they might cross the boundary. So there is a imposition of the same, so as to maintain.
there may be multiple reasons.
Yeah.
Let's say this is the boundary, this side India, this side Pakistan. Now let's say that they want to supply weapons. If anyone can, they can throw from this from this side to this side, or from this side to this side. Things can be transferred, drugs can be transferred, human trafficking can also take place. Maybe they can cut this boundary and somehow they can go this side. Terrorists can infiltrate. So there are lot many reasons, right?
Yes, sir.
So it can threaten the security of the country, it can threaten the economic. Yes, lot many things can happen. Illegal immigration can happen. Thousands things can happen. So that's the reason that there is a restriction on the movement in this particular area. Objective are these many. Okay, these many objective of this legislation, and the restriction is restriction on your movement. So this restriction, do you find reasonable? And do you find that this restriction has a proper relationship with the objective uh, that is being that has to be achieved?
Yes, sir, it makes sense.
All right. So this is what I was telling you. And if any legislation which arbitrarily or excessively invades the right cannot be said to contain the quality of reasonable and unless it strike a proper balance between the freedom guaranteed in Article 19 and the special control that is permitted by clause 6 of Article 19 is. So if what will be excessive, let's say that if any order comes up or any law comes up and this law says that if any union minister is passing, no one can show black flag. Okay, let's say that, let's assume that any law that is passed by the legislature, and it simply says that if any union minister is passing through the road, no one can show him or her black flag. So what is the restriction? The restriction is that you cannot show the symbol. What is flag? Flag is basically a symbol. So you cannot show the symbol, and what is symbol? Symbol can be used to express yourself, right? Sometimes you don't want to speak up something, but you want to express something. So you are expressing with the help of symbol. So here the curtailment on your freedom of speech and expression. So, do you think that there is a proper relationship between the objective? What is the objective? It's simple that they don't feel, any kind of. I mean, the minister should always be happy. This is what the objective is, right? Uh, they 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 should be like in that position. Everything is okay. Everything is okay. Everyone is happy. But on the same time, people there may be people who are not happy, who are dissatisfied with certain policies, with certain things that government is doing or not doing. Okay, so they want to express their anger or they want to express their position by showing black flag. They want to maybe boycott something. uh, so if this kind of legislation is there, do you think that what do you think, it's a reasonable or excessive? Tell me. Samrat, what do you think, it's a reasonable or excessive?
So this is infringement directly on the rights of the individuals. So they cannot do anything at all. So this should be excessive.
Exactly. So this kind of law which putting these kind of restriction has no proper relationship with the with this kind of the restriction and objective, and therefore it will be unconstitutional, and this is not at all reasonable. So did you understand what I was trying to say, that it should not be excessive and arbitrary, and if the reasonable restriction is there, then there should be a proper relationship between the restriction and the objective that legislation wants to achieve. Third point, there is no exact standard or general pattern of reasonableness that can be laid down for all cases. So each case is to be judged on its own merit. Remember this thing. that there is no general criteria or general pattern for of reasonableness. So it differs from case to case. Each case is to be judged on its own merit. Remember this thing. The standard varies with the nature of the right infringed, the underlying purpose of restrictions imposed, the extent and the urgency of the evil sought to be remedied, the disproportion of the imposition, the prevailing condition at that time. These factors have to be taken into consideration for any judicial verdict. Fourth one is the restriction must be reasonable from the substantive as well as procedural standpoint. The court should not consider not only the duration and extent of the restriction but also the circumstances under which and the manner in which the imposition has been authorized. The other one, the restriction which is imposed for securing the objects that laid down in the directive principle of state policy may be regarded as reasonable restriction. Next one, the court must determine the reasonableness of a restriction by objective standard and not by subjective one. So it should be based on the objective things, not on the subjective things. The next one is a restriction to be reasonable must have a rational relation with the objective which the legislature seeks to achieve and must not be in excess of the object. This we have already discussed. So these are the certain restrictions. Now I want to tell you one thing, that this is the right that is available to citizen only. The right that is granted by Article 19, these rights are available only to citizen and not to the alien or a foreigner. A foreigner is not a citizen of India and therefore he cannot claim a right under Article 19. A corporation or a company cannot claim a right under Article 19. Remember this thing. This kind of question can be asked. Therefore, you need to remember that corporation or a company, they cannot claim a right under Article 19 because they are not natural persons. Citizens under Article 19 means only natural persons and not legal person, such as corporation or companies. So remember this thing, that a corporation or a company, they cannot claim Article 19. And the term mentioned citizens means natural person, not a legal person. But one thing I want to tell you, the fundamental rights of shareholder as citizens are not lost when they are associated to form a company. So let's say that shareholder, they form the company. So these shareholders will have a right. They will have a fundamental right. Their fundamental right will not be lost. The company will not have a fundamental right. So these two are different entities. Anyone, if you have any doubts so far?
Also, you mentioned all the pointers. How many pointers that you mentioned? Like, is it there in the notes as well? Because you didn't write. So,
I will provide notes around 6, 7, 8 pointers were there.
oh, okay.
Okay.
And all these you mentioned are tests only, right? The restrictions are different.
There are nine tests. There is one test,
Okay.
and these nine are criteria.
Okay.
Okay? Freedom of speech and expression. 19 clause 1 subclause A and 19 clause 2. Freedom of speech and expression is provided under this article, and the restriction imposed on this article is there in 19 clause 2. Freedom of speech and expression is indispensable in democracy. Remember this thing. Freedom of speech and of the press lay at the foundation of all democratic organization, for without free political discussion no public education, so essential for the proper functioning of the process of popular government is possible. Now if we talk about 19 clause 1 subclause A, then it what it does, it provides that all citizens, so it includes this terms, that all citizens shall have the right to freedom of speech. So all the citizens shall have the right to freedom and speech. But this right is subject to limitation imposed under Article 19 clause 2, that empowers the state to put reasonable restrictions on the following ground. The first ground is security of the state. Second, friendly relations with foreign states. Third one, public order, decency, and morality. Next one is contempt of court, defamation. Next one, incitement to offense, and integrity and sovereignty of India. So these are the restrictions that are imposed on your freedom of speech and expression. If anything said by you or anything expressed by you threatens the security of India, then there will be a restriction on your speech and expression. If anything brings any discomfort to friendly relation with foreign state, then you cannot speak. If your speech creates the situation of law and order, or it can have a some sort of issues with the decency and morality, then you cannot speak those things or you cannot express those things. By your speech or expression, if you try to contempt the court, then it is not allowed. You cannot incite the offense, and anything that affects the integrity and sovereignty of India, you cannot speak those kind of things. And under your right, you cannot defame anyone. So these are the things that are imposed as restriction on your freedom of speech and expression. Now, what is the meaning of freedom of speech and expression? This thing is important and we need to understand this thing. Freedom of speech and expression means the right to express one's own convictions and opinions freely by words of mouth, writing, printing, pictures, or any other mode. So these are the mode of your expression. This is how you can exercise your freedom of speech and expression. So first thing is word of mouth. You can write something, you can print something, you can display the pictures or any other mode. Therefore, it includes the expression of one's ideas through any communicable medium. Is all these are communicable medium or visible representation. What are visible representation? These are gesture, sign, and the like. This expression connotes also publication. It also connotes publications. And thus, the freedom of press is included in this category. It includes publication, and therefore, freedom of press included in this category. Free propagation of ideas is the necessary objective, and this may be done on the platform or through the press. The freedom of propagation of ideas is secured by freedom of circulation. Liberty of circulation is essential to the freedom as the liberty of publication. Without circulation, publication would be of little value. So it also includes liberty of circulation also. अभी आपने कोई चीज़ पब्लिश करके रख ली लेकिन आप उसको सर्कुलेट नहीं कर पा रहे हो तो फिर किस काम का. सो यहाँ पे सर्कुलेशन भी आ जाता है. ठीक है. The freedom of speech and expression includes liberty to propagate not one's views only. It also includes the right to propagate or publish the views of other people. Otherwise, this freedom would not include the freedom of the press. So, again, you remember what happens in freedom of press. Most of the times, they come up with this. This minister has said this thing. This leader has said this thing. This is happening. So, they, the press, can also put up their own view, or they can also put up someone else's view. Freedom of press includes both things. You have freedom to speak up what is there in your mind, and you have freedom to tell those things that someone else told you. The freedom of expression has four broad special purpose. Four broad special purpose. What are these purpose? First thing, it helps an individual to attain self fulfillment. This is the first thing. Second thing, it assists in the discovery of truth. Third thing, it strengthens the capacity of an individual in participating in decision making. The next thing, it provides a mechanism by which it would be possible to establish a reasonable balance between the stability and social change. So these are the four broad purposes that freedom of expression serve. First thing, it helps an individual to attain self fulfillment. आप अपने आप को बोल सकते हो जो मन में आ रहा है बोल रहा हूँ, ठीक है, आई एम अ कंप्लीट पर्सन, ठीक है. इट असिस्ट इन द डिस्कवरी ऑफ ट्रूथ. थर्ड थिंग, इट स्ट्रेंथन द कैपेसिटी ऑफ एन इंडिविजुअल इन पार्टिसिपेटिंग इन डिसीजन मेकिंग. कोई डिसीजन मेकिंग हो रही है, वहाँ पे जाके आप बोल सकते हो, बता सकते हो ऐसी ऐसी चीज़ें होनी चाहिए, एंड यू कैन इन्फ्लुएंस दैट डिसीजन मेकिंग ऑल्सो. सो सम वन वे और द अदर वे यू आर पार्टिसिपेटिंग. It also provides a mechanism by which it would be possible to establish a reasonable balance between the stability and social change. So, these are the objectives of freedom of expression. In the fundamental principle involved here is the people rights to know. आपको अगर if you have to speak up something, then you have right to know also, that you should be able to know what is there, what's happening, what's going on, right? Not only just about your speaking things, or that you want to express yourself. It's about knowing also, isn't it? Anyone, if you have any doubts so far? Okay, I'll just talk about a Right to Information Act. The Right to Information Act came in 2005. It entitles every citizen to have access to information controlled by public authorities. Under this act, it is obligatory upon authority to provide information and maintain record consistent with its operational needs. These records would have to be duly catalogued, indexed, and published at such interval as may be prescribed by the appropriate government or the competent authority. What is the objective of this right? The objective is to promote openness, transparency, and accountability in the administration. I'm not going to discuss this PIO, Public Information Officer, and other things. Maybe I'll discuss little bit in a detail. So basically, this act makes a provision for the appointment of a public information officer. कहता है कि भाई हर जगह जो है एक पब्लिक इंफॉर्मेशन ऑफिसर होना चाहिए डिपार्टमेंट में अंडर सेक्शन 5. According to section 5, every public authority shall designate as many officer as the central public information officer or the state public information in all administrative unit or office under it as may be necessary to provide information to persons seeking information under this act. बस यही चीज़ है कि जो है जितनी पब्लिक अथॉरिटी है उनको ऑफिसर अपने डिप्लॉय करने होंगे, सेंट्रल पब्लिक इंफॉर्मेशन ऑफिसर एंड स्टेट पब्लिक इंफॉर्मेशन ऑफिसर, जो इन्फॉर्मेशन को प्रॉपरली प्रोवाइड करा सके, जितनी भी क्वेरीज आ रही हैं, जितनी भी इंफॉर्मेशन मांगी जा रही है उनको प्रोवाइड कराया जा सके. अभी क्या है काम इस पब्लिक ऑफिसर का? It that every public information officer shall deal with request for information and shall render assistance to any person seeking such information. When a request for information is received, the public information officer, as expeditiously as possible in any case, within 30 days, either provide the information required on payment of prescribed fee or reject the request for any reason that is specified in section 8 and 9. Where the information sought for concern the life and liberty of a person, the same should be provided within 48 hours of the receipt of the request. If the request is rejected by PIO, then the officer shall communicate the person making request reason for such a rejection. Section 8 provides for exemption from disclosure of information relating to certain matter. And if a person is aggrieved by decision of public information officer, then he can prefer an appeal to such authority that is prescribed in section 19. So these are the certain things. There are other things also. So let's discuss little bit because I have already told you a lot many things. So why to stay in half way? Section 20 provides that if a public information officer, without any reasonable cause, refuse to receive an application for information or refuse to furnish information within the time specified under section 7 clause 1 or malafidely denies information or destroys information, a penalty of 250 for each day till application is received or information is furnished can be imposed. However, in no case इट शैल एक्सीड मोर देन 25,000. तो अगर किसी ने कोई डिनाई कर दी या मालाफाइडली उसको डिस्ट्रॉय कर दिया तो जब तक की इन्फॉर्मेशन नहीं प्रोवाइड की जाएगी 250 रुपये पर डे के हिसाब से फ़ाइन होगा, लेकिन ये मैक्सिमम 25,000 रुपये तक हो सकता है. द पब्लिक ऑफिसर शैल बी गिवन ए रीजनेबल अपॉर्चुनिटी बिफोर एनी penalty is imposed on him. Section 23 provides that no suit or application or other proceeding in respect of any order made under this act shall be called in questions in any court otherwise than by way of appeal under section 4. तो इतना सा जो आरटीआई एक्ट का जो इम्पोर्टेंट जिस्ट था वो मैंने आपको बता दिया है, और फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच एंड एक्सप्रेशन के बारे में भी बता दिया है आपको मैंने। ठीक है, तो अब हम लोग डिस्कस करते हैं जो नेक्स्ट पॉइंट है इसका। और इसके लिए आई टेक अ ब्रेक of 10 minutes